think that should do it. Kind of have to plug in your microphone in order for it to work. Okay, this morning we'll be in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 3, verse 22. The words of the teacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Futile, futile, laments the teacher, absolutely futile, everything is futile. What benefit do people get from all the effort which they expend on earth? A generation comes and a generation goes, but the earth remains the same through the ages. The sun rises and the sun sets. It hurries away to a place from which it rises again. The wind goes to the south and circles around to the north. Round and round the wind goes, and on its rounds it returns. All the streams flow into the sea, but the sea is not full. Into the place where the streams flow, there they will flow again. All this monotony is tiresome. No one can bear to describe it. The eye is never satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear ever content with hearing. What exists now is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing truly new on earth. Is there anything about which someone can say, "Look at this, it is new"? It was already done long ago, before our time. No one remembers the former events, nor will anyone remember the events that are yet to happen. They will not be remembered by the future generations. I, the teacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. I decided to carefully and thoroughly examine all that has been accomplished on earth. I concluded, God has given people a burdensome task that keeps them occupied. I reflect on everything that is accomplished by man on earth, and I concluded, everything he has accomplished is futile, like chasing the wind. What is bent cannot be straightened, and what is missing cannot be supplied. I thought to myself, I have become much wiser than any of my predecessors who ruled over Jerusalem. I have acquired much wisdom and knowledge. So I decided to discern the benefit of wisdom and knowledge over foolish behaviors and ideas. However, I concluded that even this endeavor is like trying to chase the wind. For with great wisdom comes great frustration. Whoever increases his knowledge merely increases his heartache. I thought to myself, come now, I will try self-indulgent pleasure to see if it is worthwhile. But I found that it is also futile. I said of partying, it is folly, and of self-indulgent pleasure, it accomplishes nothing. I thought deeply about the effects of indulging myself with wine. All the while my mind was guiding me with wisdom, and the effects of behaving foolishly, so that I might discover what is profitable for people to do on earth during the few days of their lives. I increased my possessions. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I designed royal gardens and parks for myself, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I constructed pools of water for myself to irrigate my grove of flourishing trees. I purchased male and female slaves, and I owned slaves who were born in my house. I also possessed more livestock, both herds and flocks, than any of my predecessors in Jerusalem. I also amassed silver and gold for myself, as well as valuable treasure taken from kingdoms and provinces. I acquired male singers and female singers for myself, and what gives a man sensual delight, a harem of beautiful concubines. So I was far wealthier than all my predecessors in Jerusalem, yet I maintained my objectivity. I did not restrain myself from getting whatever I wanted. I did not deny myself anything that would bring me pleasure. So all my accomplishments gave me joy. This was my reward for all my effort. Yet, when I reflected on everything I had accomplished and all the effort that I had expended to accomplish it, I concluded, all these achievements and possessions are ultimately profitless, like chasing the wind. There is nothing gained from them on earth. Next, I decided to consider wisdom, as well as foolish behaviors and ideas. For what more can the king's successor do than what the king has already done? I realized that wisdom is preferable to folly, just as light is preferable to darkness. The wise man can see where he is going, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I also realized that the same fate happens to them both. So I thought to myself, the fate of the fool will happen even to me. Then what did I gain by becoming so excessively wise? So I lamented to myself, the benefits of wisdom are ultimately meaningless. For the wise man, like the fool, will not be remembered for very long. because in the days to come both will already have been forgotten. Alas, the wise man dies just like the fool. So I loathed life, because what happens on earth seems awful to me. For all the benefits of wisdom are futile, like chasing the wind. So I loathed all the fruit of my effort, for which I worked so hard on earth, because I must leave it behind in the hands of my successor. Who knows if he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will be master over all the fruit of my labor, for which I worked so wisely on earth. This also is futile. So I began to despair about all the fruit of my labor, for which I worked so hard on earth. For man may do his work with wisdom, knowledge, and skill. However, he must hand over the fruit of his labor as an inheritance to someone else who did not work for it. This also is futile, and an awful injustice. What does a man acquire from all his labor and from the anxiety that accompanies his toil on earth? For all day long his work produces pain and frustration, and even at night his mind cannot relax. This also is futile. There's nothing better for people than to eat and drink and to find enjoyment in their work. I also perceive that this ability to find enjoyment comes from God, for no one can eat and drink or experience joy apart from Him. For to the one who pleases Him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy. But to the sinner He gives the task of amassing wealth, only to give it to the one who pleases God. This task of the wicked is futile, like chasing the wind. For everything, there's an appointed time and an appropriate time for every activity on earth. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what was planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give something up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to rip and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What benefit can a worker gain from his toil? I have observed the burden that God has given to people to keep them occupied. God has made everything fit beautifully in its appropriate time, but He's also placed ignorance in the human heart so that people cannot discover what God has ordained from the beginning to the end of their lives. I've concluded that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to enjoy themselves as long as they live, and also that everyone should eat and drink and find enjoyment in all his toil. For these things are a gift from God. I also know that whatever God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken away from it. God has made it this way so that men will fear Him. Whatever exists now has already been, and whatever will be has already been, for God will seek to do again what has occurred in the past. I saw something else on the earth. In the place of justice there was wickedness, and in the place of fairness there was wickedness. I thought to myself, God will judge both the righteous and the wicked, for there is an appropriate time for every activity, and there is a time of judgment for every deed. I also thought to myself, it is for the sake of people, so God can clearly show them that they are like animals. For the fate of humans and the fate of animals are the same. As one dies, so does the other. Both have the same breath. There is no advantage for humans over animals, for both are fleeting. Both go to the same place. Both come from the dust, and to both dust return. Who really knows if the human spirit ascends upward, and the animal spirit descends into the earth? So I perceive there is nothing better than for people to enjoy their work, because that is their reward. For who can show them what the future holds? Solomon just being a ray of sunshine here. The book of Ecclesiastes is one of the most unusual and perhaps most difficult to understand books of the Bible. It has a spirit of hopeless despair. It has no praise or peace. It seems to promote questionable conduct. Yet, these words of the preacher show us the futility and foolishness of a life lived without an eternal perspective. The question in Ecclesiastes isn't about the existence of God. The author is no atheist, and God is always there. The question is whether or not God matters. The answer to that question is vitally connected to a responsibility to God that goes beyond this earthly life. He does believe in God, but very significantly, he never uses the sacred name Lord. He has shaken himself free, or wishes to represent a character who has shaken himself free from revelation, and is fighting the problem of life, its meaning and worth, without any help from the law, or prophet, or psalm. In the search for this answer, the preacher searched the depths of human experience, including despair. He thoroughly examined the emptiness and futility of life lived without eternity before coming to the conclusion of the necessity of eternity. We face the appalling inference that nothing has meaning, nothing matters under the sun. It is then that we can hear, as the good news which it is, that everything matters. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. What then is the purpose of Ecclesiastes? It is an essay in apologetics. It defends the life of faith and a generous God by pointing to the grimness of the alternative. It does not come as a formal philosopher. It is a word from God he has to share, despite his reflective, low-key approach. He does not present half a dozen arguments for the existence of God. Instead, he picks up our own questions. Can you cope with life without having any idea where you are going? You don't have all the answers to life's enigmas, do you? Your neo-pagan view of life doesn't give you any hope of achieving very much, does it? Nature will not answer your questions, and you are bored by it anyway. History baffles your attempts to understand it. You don't like to think about your own death, yet it is the most certain fact about your existence. Ecclesiastes does not pretend to preach the gospel. Rather, it encourages the reader to a God-centered worldview rather than falling victim to frustrations and unanswered questions. None of its contents have to be rejected in the light of the New Testament. Yeah, this preacher talks about life under the sun, a recurring theme throughout the book. That is, life without considering a eternal perspective. And you can see as much in the third chapter when he talks about the life of beasts versus that of humans. In 3:19, as the fate of humans and the fate of animals are the same, as one dies, so does the other. Both have the same breath. There's no advantage for humans over animals, for both are fleeting. Both go to the same place. Both come from dust, and to dust both return. Yeah, so he is completely excluding an afterlife from his contemplation of this world. And in such concludes the futility of activities done under the sun. Yeah. Vanity of vanities. To strengthen his point, the preacher judged life to be the ultimate vanity, the vanity of vanities. The Hebrew phrasing is used to express intensity or the ultimate of something, as in the phrase Holy of Holies. The phrase will be used about 30 times in this short book. It is one of the major themes of Ecclesiastes. To further strengthen the point, Solomon noted not only that life is vanity, but that all is vanity. It seemed that every part of life suffered from this emptiness. Yeah, he shows the cyclic nature of, well, nature, and how it's not coming to a head. He talks about labor and, well, how that ultimately proves meaningless. This burdensome task God has given to the sons of man, by which they may be exercised. The seeming futility of life comes from God. He has given it to man. God has deliberately built a system where life seems meaningless and empty, without the understanding of a living, active God to whom we must give account. It may seem cruel of God to devise such a system, but it is actually evidence of his great love and mercy. He built within us the desire and need for that which brings meaning and fulfillment to life. As Augustine wrote, the Creator made a God-shaped space in each of us, which can only be filled with him. The desire is found not only in us, as people, but also in creation itself. God also subjected creation to this futility until he one day brings the promised fulfillment. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. Solomon said in my heart, "Come now, I will test you." The previous section saw Solomon looking for the meaning of life in wisdom, wisdom as it can be understood apart from eternity. He found no meaning in skillful, wise living under the sun. Now he continued his search for meaning and tested a life of pleasure and amusement. The preacher is not testing pleasures so much as himself. Solomon tested life's meaning in mirth and pleasure. He tested the theory many live under today, that the meaning of life is found in more and varied pleasures, entertainments, and excitements. But surely this also was vanity. Yeah, I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? Solomon tested the life lived for laughter, pleasure, and fun. Like a modern celebrity, he ran from party to party, entertainment to entertainment. At the end of it all, he judged it to be madness and without accomplishment. I made my works great. The preacher looked not only for meaning in amusements, but also in great and legitimate accomplishments. He tried to give life meaning through the satisfaction that comes through building and organizing and improving one's environment. Solomon's accomplishments rightly lifted him to prominence, and he had whatever meaning fame could bring to life. In all of this, Solomon did not lose his wisdom or ability to genuinely assess meaning and fulfillment, at least in an under-the-sun premise. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor. We might say that the preacher lived this period as a hedonist, but as an intelligent one. He looked for legitimate pleasures in life, such as the rightful pleasure one takes in the accomplishments of hard work. Solomon examined his life lived for pleasure, even legitimate pleasures, and saw that it too was meaningless. All was vanity. There was no enduring, eternal sense of meaning to life lived for these eternal pleasures and accomplishments. This is as modern as ennui, a feeling of dissatisfaction and uselessness of every human soul which seeks knowledge, mirth, wealth, life, and forgets God. I turned myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. The preacher continued to search after meaning in life and followed the lines of wisdom and madness and folly further until their ending point. For what can the man do who succeeds the king? Solomon here spoke of himself as the son of David, yet he also spoke of his own successor, who turned out to be Rehoboam. Of both, Solomon understood that the new king can do only what he has already done. Even for a king, there is nothing new under the sun. Yeah, he's only repeating the same pattern that his predecessor established. As it happens to the fool, it also happens to me, and why was I then more wise? If death ends it all, then this life is robbed of true meaning. Even the good and great accomplishments of the world are unbelievably temporary, and therefore ultimately meaningless. The wise man dies just as the fool. Truly the preacher looked at this and said, this also is vanity. Then I hated all my labor, because I must leave it to a man who will come after me. Not only did Solomon hate life under this thinking, he also hated his very accomplishments, saying of them, this also is vanity. The idea that Solomon might leave all his work and material wealth to a fool seemed to trouble him. This concern was well founded, because after Solomon's death, Rehoboam turned out to be a fool in many ways. Alas, Solomon, the wisest of all men, made the worst use of his wisdom, had 700 wives and 300 concubines, and yet left but one son behind him, to possess his estates and his throne, and that one was the silliest of fools. Under his premise, death haunted Solomon, not in the sense that he seemed afraid to die, but he despaired of how death, if that ends existence, makes all meaningless. The only conclusion is that it is all useless. An abyss of despair results. He allowed his heart to despair, as the Hebrew verb may be translated. This is one of the most moving points of the Old Testament, the antithesis of the New Testament's not in vain in the Lord. If death robs our work of meaning, then life is indeed sorrowful, work is burdensome, and there is no rest or relief from the despair of a meaningless life. Surely this also is vanity. Actually, it's worse than vanity. The preacher also observed that in an under-the-sun world, this is a great evil. The preacher hints at a vital question. Why does this bother us so? If this is indeed man's lot, and always has been, if every thought of an eternal meaning to life is a wish and a fantasy, then why does that idea cause discontent in most everyone? Man may wish he could fly like a bird, but there's little sense of meaninglessness in the heart of a man or a woman because they cannot fly like a bird. This is because man was not designed to fly like a bird, but he is designed for eternity. Nothing is better for a man than he should eat and drink. This thought is prominent in Ecclesiastes, being repeated some 5 times. It seems that the preacher advised us how to make the best of a bad situation. If life really is as despairing and meaningless as he has shown it to be, then we should simply accept that true meaning is impossible to find, and simply find contentment in moderate and responsible pleasure. This thinking is prominent in our day. Few people live for true eternal meaning in their life, so they live with under-the-sun rules. They try to work hard, to enjoy life, to have fun, to be nice, to not get caught doing wrong, and then try not to hurt anybody. This thinking may work making a bad situation better, but it gives no true meaning to life in light of eternity. This may seem to savor of Epicureanism, as may also some following passages of this book, for which cause some of the old Jew doctors were once in a mind to hide this whole book out of the way and not suffer the common sort to see it anymore. Then you have the bird's passage here with time for everything under heaven. And more inquiry as to the profit of labor. Moreover, Solomon looks for justice on the earth, but sees wickedness there. Solomon looked at the world, the here and now world, apart from considering eternity, and saw that there was great evil and injustice. Instead of fair judgment, he found wickedness. Instead of righteousness, he found iniquity. One of the greatest problems in understanding the total plan of God is that reward and punishment sometimes seem so conspicuously absent. This is a significant problem under the sun. If man does not have to reckon with eternity, if this life is all there is, then many of the wicked and evil people win, and many good and righteous people lose. The idea of karma does not consistently work, at least not in this life. The preacher said, perhaps hoped, that he knew God would judge the righteous and the wicked, and not only in this life, because there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. God will judge the deeds of man to see if it fit the proper purpose and work. Ugh. Anyway, carrying on here. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. We then, as workers together with him, beseech you also that you receive not the grace of God in vain. For he saith, it's King James Version. For he says, I heard you at the acceptable time, and in the day of salvation I helped you. Look, now is the acceptable time. Look, now is the day of salvation. We do not give anyone an occasion for taking an offense in anything, so that no fault may be found with our ministry. But as God's servants, we have commended ourselves in every way with great endurance, in persecutions and difficulties and distresses, in beatings and imprisonments and riots and troubles, in sleepless nights and hunger, by purity, by knowledge, by patience, by benevolence, by the Holy Spirit, by genuine love, by truthful teaching, by the power of God, with weapons of righteousness, both for the right hand and for the left, through glory and dishonor, through slander and praise, regarded as impostors, and yet true, as unknown, and yet well known, as dying, and yet see, we continue to live, as those who are scourged, and yet not executed, as sorrowful, but always rejoicing, as poor, but making many rich, as having nothing, and yet possessing everything. We have spoken freely to you, Corinthians. Our heart has been opened wide to you. Our affection for you is not restricted, but you are restricted in your affections for us. Now as a fair exchange, I speak as to my children, open wide your hearts to us also. Do not become partners with those who do not believe, for what partnership is there between righteousness and lawlessness? Or what fellowship does light have with darkness? Through 13. Whoops. Yeah. Paul points out this curious aspect of the Christian life, particularly of that of the apostle in his life, I guess, that this contradictory nature almost to it of something being perceived, yet the counterpoint also being perceived. There's beatings, imprisonment, riots, troubles, sleepless nights, and hunger. But there's also purity, knowledge, patience, benevolence, genuine love. So, as being unknown and yet well known, as dying and living. So, kind of neat. Just points to the power of God being exercised in their lives. In Paul's resume, as an apostle, ambassador, and co-worker with Jesus, he follows patience with describing why he needed this endurance. First, it was because of the general struggles and trials of life. Paul was often stressed and under pressure. This is the idea behind the word for tribulation, often needy and often in distress. Stripes, imprisonments, and tumults. As Paul continues his resume, he writes of sufferings directly inflicted by men. Stripes were the wounds on the back from a whipping. Imprisonments refer to the frequent times Paul spent in jail, and tumults speak of violence from an angry mob. Labor, sleeplessness, and fastings. Paul continues his resume with describing his self-inflicted hardships. No one made him work so hard, keep so many sleepless nights, or go without food so often. These were true trials, but ones Paul chose willingly as a co-worker with Jesus Christ. Paul isn't complaining about these because they were self-inflicted, but they were relevant to his need for patience. Paul knew he needed endurance, and he knew many things in his life drew him to seek that endurance. I like the picture of weapons of righteousness on the right hand and on the left. Here Paul begins to describe the resources he took advantage of in triumphing over adversity. If he honestly listed his trials, he will also honestly list the fruit of the Spirit and the power of God in his life. The idea of both on the right hand and on the left of holding both offensive and defensive weapons is probably has in mind both advancing and being attacked, particularly the shield and the sword, the former on the left arm, the latter on the right hand. We have the doctrines of truth and the power of God as an armor to protect us on all sides, everywhere, and on all occasions. Carrying on, Psalm chapter 46, verses 1 through 11. God is our strong refuge. He is truly our helper in times of trouble. For this reason we do not fear when the earth shakes and the mountains tumble into the depths of the sea, when its waves crash and foam and the mountains shake before the surging sea. Selah. The river's channels bring joy to the city of God, the special, holy dwelling place of the Sovereign One. God lives within it. It cannot be moved. God rescues it at the break of dawn. Nations are in an uproar. Kingdoms are overthrown. God gives a shout. The earth dissolves. The Lord who commands armies is on our side. The God of Jacob is our protector. Selah. Come, witness the exploits of the Lord, who brings devastation to the earth. He brings an end to wars throughout the earth. He shatters the bow and breaks the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, "Stop your striving and recognize that I am God. I will be exalted over the nations. I will be exalted over the earth. The Lord who commands armies is on our side. The God of Jacob is our protector." Selah. Yeah, I think the psalmist points here to the hope we can have with God as our hope. That is, even if the mountains tremble and fall into the sea, that we can stand firm and not fear. Yeah, and I think it also points to how we shouldn't just have a this worldly perspective. In 46:10, he says, "Stop your striving and recognize that I am God. I will be exalted over the nations. I will be exalted over the earth." And finally, Proverbs chapter 22, verse 15. "Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him." Yeah, discipline is important. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.